Welcome to this rapid revision session on King's Campaign in the North, 1966. Not, it has to be said, one of his most successful campaigns. So what did it do? And did it go wrong? King's Chicago Campaign. Shocked by the Watts riot, King began to concentrate on wider issues of living conditions and inequality elsewhere in the USA rather than just the Deep South, as had been his focus before. His campaign in the North in 1966 largely failed. Here's why. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference's non-violent and Christian protests failed to connect with ghetto communities in the North. Black Chicago politicians didn't back the campaign. King was unable to prevent violent incidents during the campaign as well, which discredited him somewhat. And King's relationship with Johnson was becoming strained due to King's open opposition to the war in Vietnam. After all, Johnson felt that by passing the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, he'd done quite enough for the civil rights movement. This doesn't necessarily acknowledge the improvements in black people's lives that resulted, many of which were pretty few, to be honest with you. These are legal gains rather than social gains. But in particular, this is when Johnson is embroiled in the Vietnam War. That is his priority, and he could rather do with the civil rights leaders being on his side. That was hardly going to happen when so many black soldiers were dying in Vietnam, though. So what happened? This source is from an interview given in 1990 by Bob Lucas of the Congress of Racial Equality. He refers to the last black marches through white neighbourhoods in Chicago held after King left, during which there was some black retaliation to white violence. I felt really good about the blacks catching the missiles and throwing them back at the whites who threw them during black marches, because it sorely indicated to the whole world that non-violence had worked in the South, but it wasn't about to really work in the North. After Dr. King left in late August of 1966, having failed really in Chicago, we began to notice a wider split between the blacks and whites in the civil rights movement. As long as Dr. King was here, that was sort of held at bay out of respect for him. There's a few things to pick up from this. That last line about people keeping the violence down out of respect for Martin Luther King shows that he really was still seen as one of the major leaders of the civil rights movement, and for many people, the leader of the civil rights movement. This is possibly a consequence of his famous I Have a Dream speech in 1963. But it also shows that civil rights campaigns were becoming more and more fractured, with several black participants feeling that change wasn't coming quick enough and advocating for more militant black power related protests, whereas white people felt that they were not being listened to either and felt less comfortable participating and joining with black people within these groups. We find this also with Congress of Racial Equality, as here, but also remember the change in SNCC from the Student National Nonviolent Coordinating Committee to the Student National Coordinating Committee. That's quite the shift. So King's campaign in the North has failed to catch on in the way that his Deep South campaigns have. It's not like the Montgomery bus boycott, or the March on Washington, or Selma. In fact, it's largely seen as a failure, and let's see why. King wanted to improve lives in the North in response to the riots in LA in 1965 and 1966. People seemed broadly supportive at first, but there was little lasting support. The campaign showed that there was still much progress to be made across the country, and frustration at a lack of progress was turning some people off non-violence as a protest method, driving something of a wedge between black supporters of civil rights and white supporters. Times were going to be difficult. Legal gains did not necessarily transform into lifestyle gains for black communities, and that was going to be a challenge for another time. But that's the end of this rather short rapid revision video. I hope it's been useful to you. If it has, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Hopefully you have found this useful, and if you have, thanks and goodbye.